Every Sunday for the past 7 years, I sat alone on the same park bench, wearing the silver bracelet I had made for my daughter before she died. That morning, three little children ran straight toward me. One of them pointed at my wrist and asked, "Sir, why do you have the same bracelet as our mom?" I froze. There were only two bracelets like this in the world. My daughter had supposedly died 7 years ago. Just then, an older woman rushed over to collect the children. She looked at my face, then at the bracelet on my wrist, and what she told me next pulled the ground out from under 7 years of my life. Welcome to Dad Family Revenge. If this story already has your attention, I'm glad you stayed. Tell me in the comments what city or country are you watching from today. Every response means the world to me. This story includes creative elements added for entertainment and education. Names and settings are fictional, but the truth at its heart belongs to all of us. My name is Daniel Harper, and I am 60 years old, and I have been sitting on this same bench every Sunday morning for 7 years. Not because I enjoy the view, though. The view is undeniably something Elliott Bay spread out before me like a sheet of hammered silver in the October light. The Olympic Mountains sitting low and blue on the far horizon, the ferries crossing back and forth, with the slow, indifferent patience of things that have been doing the same job for a very long time. Not because the coffee from the cart near the south entrance is particularly good, though the man who runs it, a heavy-set fellow named George, who wears the same Seahawks cap in every weather, always hands me my cup with a nod that carries more warmth than a nod has any right to carry. I come here because this bench is the one place in my week where nobody needs anything from me. Not a decision about soil, pH, or irrigation schedules. Not a signature on a distribution contract. Not a composed expression across a conference table while a man in an expensive suit explains in language designed to sound like wisdom why selling everything my family built over 30 years is actually the sensible choice. On this bench on Sunday mornings, I am not Daniel Harper, founder of Harper Lavender Farm, holder of 3 plant patents, employer of 41 people in Sequim, Washington. I am not the man who spent 23 years developing a strain of lavender that blooms 2 weeks longer than any commercially available variety and carries a fragrance that 3 separate perfumers in Portland have described in 3 separate conversations as the closest thing to bottled memory we have ever encountered. On this bench, I am just the man who misses his daughter. Sequim sits on the Olympic Peninsula, tucked into a rain shadow that gives it more sunshine than anywhere else in western Washington, which is the reason the lavender grows there, and the reason my father drove out from Spokane in 1989 to look at a piece of land and came home talking about purple fields and possibilities. I was 17. I thought he was describing a painting. It took me until I was 28 and had spent a decade working other people's soil to understand that he had been describing a life. I bought the land in 1992 with money I did not entirely have and built the first greenhouse with lumber. I milled myself from Douglas fir I harvested from the back 40. The lavender went in the ground. The following spring, 40 rows, each one 100 feet long, each plant set 18 inches apart with a precision that my first hired hand, a retired school teacher named Carol, who needed something to do with his hands, told me bordered on obsessive. I told Carol that obsessive was just another word for caring enough to get it right. He laughed and set the next plant at exactly 18 inches, and we worked until dark and ate sandwiches on the tailgate of my truck and watched the stars come out over the mountains. I have not eaten a sandwich on a tailgate since Emily died. Emily Margaret Harper, my daughter. She was 26 years old in November of 2017, and she had her mother's dark eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness and a particular laugh that started somewhere deep in her chest and worked its way up through her whole body before it finally made it out into the room so that by the time you heard it, You had already seen it coming and had already started smiling in anticipation. She could identify 47 varieties of lavender by scent alone, blindfolded, without hesitation. I know this because I tested her on her 21st birthday with a row of sample jars and a kitchen towel over her eyes, and she named every one correctly and then told me the soil composition each variety preferred, and I stood there in my own barn, feeling like the student. She called the farm the Purple Kingdom. She called me Dad in public and the Purple King in private, which she thought was funnier than I did, until the day I admitted that I thought it was exactly as funny as she did. I called her Little Bee. The name started when she was 4 years old and followed a honeybee across 3 rows of lavender, with the focused, unhurried determination of a child who has decided that something is worth following and sees no reason why the bee's indifference to being followed should change that. She tracked it for 40 minutes. I walked behind her close enough to catch her if she stumbled far enough back that I was not interrupting whatever negotiation she was conducting with the natural world. When the bee finally disappeared into the hive box at the end of the row, she turned around and looked at me with an expression of complete satisfaction, as if the entire exercise had confirmed something she had suspected all along. "That's my bee," she said. "Is it?" I said. "It came back to me 3 times," she said. "That means it's mine." I did not argue the point. I have not been able to argue that point in the 30 years since because I have never been able to determine where she was wrong. The bracelet on my right wrist is silver. I made it myself in the small workshop behind the main house on a February night in 2001 when Emily was 10 years old and had asked me with the directness that was already fully developed in her at that age, why the things people gave each other to remember each other by were always bought from stores where strangers had made them for other strangers. "Because making things is hard," I told her. "You make things," she said. "I make lavender," I said. "That's different." "You made the barn," she said. "You made the irrigation system. You made the greenhouse." "Those are practical things," I said. "So make something practical," she said. "Something I can carry." I worked for 3 nights. I am not a jeweler. My hands are built for soil and timber and the kind of sustained physical work that leaves calluses in specific places. But I have always been able to make things precise when precision is called for, and I wanted this to be precise. The bracelet is a simple band 1/4 inch wide with 2 elements worked into the surface, a small lavender sprig on the left side. Each tiny flower individually shaped with a tool I made from a finishing nail, and on the right side 2 words in letters small enough that you have to hold the bracelet close to read them. Little B. I fastened it around Emily's wrist on a Sunday morning in February in the kitchen, while the coffee was brewing and the frost was still on the greenhouse glass outside. She held her wrist up and turned it in the light and did not say anything for a long moment, which was unusual for her. Then she looked up at me. "I'm never taking this off," she said. "It's yours," I said. "You do what you want with it." "I'm never taking this off," she said again, as if I had not understood her the first time. She never took it off. I know this because when November of 2017 came and the search teams found nothing, and the sheriff's deputy sat across from me in my own kitchen and told me in the careful language of a man who has had to deliver this kind of news before that the conditions in that section of the North Cascades made recovery extremely unlikely, the first thing I thought, before grief, before disbelief, before the long falling sensation that did not stop for months, the first thing I thought was the bracelet is still out there, somewhere in the snow, on her wrist, still saying Little B. I could not find her. I could not bring her home. But I could do one thing. I went back to the workshop. I worked for 2 nights, and I made myself the other half a matching band, same width, same lavender sprig, same letters, and I put it on my own wrist on a Thursday morning in December of 2017, and I have not taken it off in the 7 years since. It is not a rational thing to do. I am aware of this. I am a man who spent 3 decades making decisions based on soil science and market analysis and the kind of careful, evidence-based reasoning that separates a successful agricultural operation from a romantic failure. But grief does not ask for your credentials. Grief takes what it finds. I raised my coffee cup and drank what was left of it, which was cold and tasted mostly of waiting. Around me the park was filling in the slow Sunday morning way, a woman in running clothes pushing a stroller with the focused exhaustion of someone who had been awake since 5, a pair of older men playing chess at the concrete table near the fountain. A golden retriever pulling its owner toward the waterline with the absolute conviction of a creature that has never once doubted the rightness of its own desires. I was thinking about nothing in particular. That was the point of the bench. That was the entire point. Then I heard them. 2 sets of small feet, then 3, the particular rhythm of children running at full speed for the pure reason that full speed is available to them, and they see no argument against using it. I looked up from my empty cup and saw 3 small figures coming around the curve in the path. 3 children in matching yellow rain jackets, dark-haired, bright-eyed, moving with the total commitment of people who have somewhere extremely important to be and have determined that somewhere is directly in front of my bench. They stopped. All 3. At exactly the same moment. The girl on the left slightly ahead of the other 2, the way a person runs. When they consider themselves the responsible one, looked at my face. Then she looked down at my right wrist. Then she looked back at my face with the expression of a child who has just recognized something significant and is working out with great seriousness what to do with that information. She pointed at my wrist. "Sir," she said, and her voice carried the particular gravity of a 6-year-old delivering important news. "Why do you have the same bracelet as our mom?" She was 6 years old, maybe 7, and she asked the question the way children ask the questions that undo adults without hesitation, without awareness that the answer might cost something, with the complete and reasonable expectation that a straightforward question deserves a straightforward answer. I could not speak. I looked down at my wrist, the silver band, the small lavender sprig, the 2 words I had pressed into the metal with a tool made from a finishing nail on a February night 16 years ago. "It's not exactly the same," the second child said, a boy standing to the girl's right, hands stuffed into the pockets of his yellow jacket with the casual authority of someone delivering a technical correction. "Ours has different flowers on it, but the letters are the same. We asked Mom what they mean, and she said they're the most important words she knows." My chest did something I have no clinical name for. Not pain, not the grief I had carried so long. It had become indistinguishable from my own personality. Something new. Something with an edge that cut in a direction I had not felt in 7 years. She cried. The third child, said a girl slightly smaller than the first, her voice dropping the way children's voices drop when they are reporting something that confused and moved them in equal measure. "The one time we asked about it, Mom doesn't cry very much, so we remembered." The first girl, the one who had asked the question, the one who had pointed, nodded with the solemn confirmation of a person whose account has just been independently verified. "I'm Emma," she said. "That's Noah. That's Sophie. We're triplets. I'm 4 minutes older, so technically I'm in charge." Noah's expression suggested he had filed a formal objection to this characterization and been overruled. I pressed my thumb against the bracelet on my wrist. The raised letters. Little B. I had pressed my thumb against those letters 10,000 times in 7 years, standing at the kitchen sink, sitting in the truck outside the farm gate, lying awake at 3 in the morning, in a house that had too many rooms and not enough sound. "What is your mother's name?" My voice came out lower than I intended, rougher. "Emily," Emma said. "Emily Carter." A woman's voice came from somewhere down the path behind them, high and moving fast. "Emma, Noah, Sophie, do not move. I am coming to you right now." She came around the bend at the particular speed of a grandmother who has made peace with the fact that her grandchildren will always be 30 seconds ahead of her and has decided that dignity requires she not actually run. Linda Carter was perhaps 68, silver-haired, wearing a rain jacket the color of a foggy morning, and she arrived with both hands reaching for the nearest child, automatically, the way hands reach when they have spent years catching things. "I'm so sorry," she said to me, slightly breathless. "They got away from me at the fountain, and I—" She stopped. She looked at my face. Whatever she saw there made her stop talking entirely. "Emily Carter," I said. "Your daughter-in-law." "My son's wife, yes." Linda's eyes moved to my wrist, then back to my face. Do you know her?" I opened my mouth, closed it. There was no version of the answer that was small enough to say on a park bench on a Sunday morning to a woman I had never met. "She had a little accident this morning," Linda said carefully, watching me. "Slipped on the back steps. She's at Seattle Medical right now just for observation. They always want to observe her because of her history, her head injury from years ago." I was already standing, my legs held. I was grateful for that. In the abstract way, you are grateful for things you have taken for granted until the moment you need them most. "Which entrance?" I said. "Seattle Medical. Which entrance do I use?" Linda stared at me. Emma tugged on her grandmother's sleeve. "Grandma," she said with the quiet certainty of a 6-year-old who has understood something the adults have not yet caught up to. "I think he knows Mom." The taxi driver asked me twice if I was all right. I told him I was fine both times, which was not true either time, but was the kind of answer that ends conversations, and I needed the conversation to end because I needed every piece of my mind for what it was currently doing, which was trying to hold 7 years of certainty up against 3 sentences spoken by a 6-year-old girl in a yellow rain jacket and figure out how the math could possibly work. It did not work. And yet here I was, sitting in the back of a cab on a Sunday morning in October, watching Seattle move past the window, my thumb pressed hard against the bracelet on my wrist, my heart doing something loud and unignorable in my chest. I had believed them. That was the thing I kept arriving at, the thing I could not get past, the thing that sat in the center of everything else like a stone you keep stepping around because you are not ready to pick it up yet. I had believed them without asking a single question that mattered. It was April of 2017 when I made the announcement. We were sitting at the long table in the farmhouse kitchen, Emily on my left, Ryan on her left, Olivia Grant across from me with her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a legal pad in front of her that she had not yet written on. I told them I was moving forward with the Agricultural Scholarship Foundation. 40% of the farm's annual net revenue permanently directed into a trust for first-generation farming students across Washington state. Emily had known it was coming. She put her hand over mine on the table and said, "It's the right thing, Dad. It's absolutely the right thing." Ryan said, "That's incredibly generous, Daniel." He smiled when he said it. He had a good smile, the kind that arrived at the right moment and stayed exactly as long as it should, and never overstayed its welcome. I had always admired that about him. I understand now that I was admiring a skill. What I did not see, because I was not looking for it, was what his eyes did in the 2 seconds after the smile. A calculation. Fast and cold and immediately covered over. I was not looking for it because it had never occurred to me that there was anything to look for. That was my failure. The first one. November came early to the North Cascades that year. The volunteer trip was Emily's idea. She organized it every fall, a long weekend, clearing trails and restocking the emergency shelters in the back country above the Cascade River corridor. Ryan had never come before. That year, he asked to join. I know now why he asked to join. Emily called me from the trail on the second evening. I was in the workshop sanding a piece of trim for the new greenhouse door, and I almost did not answer because my hands were covered in sawdust and the phone was across the room. I answered because it was Emily. I always answered when it was Emily. Dad. Her voice was wrong in a way I had no name for, immediately not frightened exactly, but tight controlled the voice of a person keeping something contained through deliberate effort. Dad, I need to tell you something. I saw Ryan tonight meeting with a man named Marcus Webb. He's a real estate developer. He represents a company called Pinnacle Group, and they want to buy the farm. Dad, the whole farm. And Ryan has been talking to them since at least June because Marcus Webb mentioned a meeting in June and Ryan didn't correct him and the call cut off. I called back 4 times. Each time it went straight to voicemail. I told myself the signal had dropped, which happens in the mountains, which was a reasonable explanation, which I believed because I needed to believe something reasonable. In the morning, I called the trip coordinator. He told me Emily had slipped on an icy section of trail and gone over the edge of the ridge. The search teams were already out. Ryan had reported the accident at first light. He was devastated, the coordinator said. Absolutely beside himself. What Ryan had told the search coordinator was that Emily had slipped near the trail marker at mile 8.3. He was precise about this. Mile 8.3. He described it clearly. He was so composed given the circumstances that the coordinator mentioned it to me specifically how helpful it was to have someone who could hold it together and give accurate information even in that kind of moment. Emily had not gone over at mile 8.3. I do not know how I know this. I did not know it then. It arrived in me somewhere in the back of that taxicab. 7 years later, like a piece of information that had always been there and had simply been waiting for the right moment to surface. The search teams covered mile 8.3 and a full mile in every direction and found nothing because there was nothing to find there. Ryan had pointed them the wrong way. He had stood in the cold at first light on a November morning, composed enough to be helpful, and he had sent 40 trained search and rescue volunteers 3 miles from where Emily actually was. And then he had waited. And 2 days later, when the snow had come down heavy overnight, and the search coordinator called to say they were suspending active operations given the conditions, and the elapsed time, Ryan had called me and told me in a voice thick with something I had mistaken for grief, that it was time to accept what the mountain was telling us. I accepted it. I sat down at my kitchen table, and I accepted it, and I stopped asking questions, and I gave him everything. The taxi turned onto First Hill, and Seattle Medical Center appeared through the windshield, gray and solid and enormous, the way institutions look when they have been standing long enough to stop trying to impress anyone. I put my hand flat against the window glass. It was cold. The cold was real. The bracelet under my other thumb was real. Emily Carter, the grandmother had said. Emily Carter at Seattle Medical. I was out of the cab before it fully stopped. The woman at the reception desk asked me 3 times for the patient's name before I realized I had not said it out loud yet. Emily Carter, I said. She was brought in this morning, fall injury, head trauma history. The woman typed, looked at her screen, looked at me. Are you family? I opened my mouth, closed it. Yes, I said. I'm family. She directed me to the 4th floor. I did not wait for the elevator. He was standing in this hallway outside room 412 when I came through the stairwell door, a tall man in his early 40s, dark-haired, still wearing a jacket he had clearly grabbed on the way out the door without thinking about it. He had the particular stillness of someone who has run out of useful things to do and is now simply enduring the time between the last thing that happened and the next thing that will. Linda Carter appeared from the waiting area behind him and said something to him quietly. He turned and looked at me. "Michael Carter," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm and automatic, the handshake of a man who shakes hands in professional settings often enough that it has become reflex. "Emily's husband." "Daniel Harper," I said. Something moved across his face, not recognition, but the awareness that recognition should be happening and isn't, which is its own kind of discomfort. "Harper," he repeated. "Emily never—" He stopped himself. "She wouldn't have," I said. "She didn't know." A woman in a white coat stepped out of room 412 and pulled the door partially closed behind her. She was perhaps 48, with the focused, unhurried manner of someone who has delivered difficult information so many times that she has learned the difference between urgency and haste. "Dr. Susan Reeves," she said. "I'm Emily's neurologist. I've been treating her for 7 years." She looked at me with an attention that was professional and very careful. "Mrs. Carter described what happened at the park. Before I take you in, I need to explain some things." She told me about the accident. November 2017. A man named Michael Carter, then a volunteer with the Skagit County Search and Rescue Auxiliary, had found a woman in a gully 3 miles east of the designated search area in terrain that no official team had been assigned to cover, because the location coordinates provided to the search coordinator had placed the incident elsewhere. The woman had no identification, no phone, no clothing with labels, only a silver bracelet on her right wrist that the paramedics had carefully preserved. "The bracelet," I said. "She would not let anyone remove it," Dr. Reeves said. "Not then, not in 7 years. The brain injury had been severe. A subdural hematoma requiring emergency surgery, followed by a period of unconsciousness, followed by weeks of fragmented awareness. When Emily finally became consistently alert and oriented, she could tell them her first name. She could not tell them anything else. Her long-term memory, everything before the moment Michael found her in that gully, was simply gone. "We searched every missing persons database," Dr. Reeves said. "Washington State, national, international. We had her photograph circulated through 3 law enforcement agencies. Nothing came back." Emily had changed in the years after the surgery, her hair, her weight, the particular way grief and recovery reshape a face over time. She lived on the east side of Queen Anne, far from the neighborhoods Daniel frequented. And Daniel himself had withdrawn almost entirely from public life after November of 2017. The circles that might have connected them had stopped overlapping long before Emily arrived in the city. After 18 months with no identification and no match in any database, Dr. Reeves continued, "We filed a petition with King County Superior Court under Washington's procedure for unidentified persons with permanent amnesia. The court issued a legal identity order, what's sometimes called a Jane Doe identity restoration. It assigned her a legal name and a court-issued identification number that allowed her to obtain a state ID, a social security number, and eventually a birth certificate equivalent recognized by the state. It's an uncommon process, but it exists precisely for cases like hers." She paused. "Michael's family had a family attorney who knew how to navigate it. Without that, I'm not sure how she would have managed." "Because the report filed was for a different location," I said. 3 miles west. Different terrain description. Different physical circumstances. Dr. Reeves looked at me steadily. "That would explain it," she said. Michael had been listening without speaking, his arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set in the careful way of a man processing something at speed and not yet ready to show where the processing is taking him. "Who filed the wrong report?" he asked. I looked at him. "Her husband," I said. Her husband at the time. The hallway was very quiet. A cart rolled past at the far end. Somewhere below us, an announcement played over the intercom and faded. "She's awake," Dr. Reeves said, "and she's been asking about the man the children saw at the park." She looked at me. "The man with the bracelet." I looked at the door to room 412. "Can I go in?" I said. Dr. Reeves stepped aside. The room smelled like antiseptic, and the particular staleness of recycled air, and the afternoon light came through the window at a low angle that turned everything slightly gold, the way October light does when it is trying to make something ordinary look significant. She was sitting up in the bed, not lying down, not resting, sitting up with her back straight, and her hands folded in her lap, like someone who had been told to wait and had decided that waiting upright was the only dignified option. She was 33 years old, and she had her mother's dark hair, and I would learn later her grandfather's stubbornness already fully operational in the set of her jaw. There was a bandage at her left temple, small and white and neatly applied. She was wearing a hospital gown, and she looked like a person who found hospital gowns personally offensive, but had decided this was not the moment to address that particular grievance. She looked at me when I came through the door. Not with recognition, with assessment. The careful, measuring look of a woman who has learned through 7 years of not knowing who she is to read strangers very quickly for information that might matter. I stopped just inside the doorway. I did not move toward her. I did not speak. I understood in some way I could not have articulated that whatever was about to happen needed to happen at its own speed, and that my job right now was simply to be still and let it. Her eyes moved from my face to my right wrist and stopped. I watched it happen. I watched the exact moment her eyes landed on the bracelet, the silver band, the lavender sprig, the 2 small words, and I watched her body respond before her mind had time to construct an explanation for what it was responding to. Her spine straightened further. Her folded hands came apart. Her chin lifted slightly the way a person's chin lifts when they have heard a sound they recognize but cannot immediately place. "That bracelet," she said. Her voice was low and careful, the voice of a person testing a sentence before committing to it. "I know that bracelet." "Yes," I said. "You do." She shook her head, not in disagreement, but in the frustrated reaching gesture of someone trying to pull a memory through water. "I don't know how I know it. I've tried Dr. Reeves, and I have spent hours. We've tried every approach she knows, and I can't." She stopped, pressed her lips together hard. Her hands gripped the blanket on either side of her legs, knuckles going white. Then something shifted. It did not arrive as a memory. It arrived as a feeling. The distinction matters, and she would explain it to me later, with a precision that told me she had thought about this distinction many times. Not the image of a place, but the feeling of being in it. Not the sight of purple fields, but the smell of them after rain, the particular damp earth sweetness of lavender in wet soil, the way that smell had always meant in some part of her that never entirely went away that she was home. Her breath caught. "Purple," she whispered. "There's purple everywhere, and someone is whistling." She looked up at me with an expression that cracked something open behind my sternum. Someone always whistles in the morning. I can't see the face, but I know the sound, and I know that wherever that sound is, I'm supposed to be there. My throat closed completely. I had whistled every morning for 30 years while I worked. Emily used to say she could find me anywhere on 40 acres just by listening. She used to say the lavender grew toward the sound. Behind me, I heard Michael step into the doorway. I heard Dr. Reeves say something quietly to him in the hallway. I did not turn around. I could not turn around. I walked to the chair beside her bed, and I sat down. I leaned forward with my elbows on my knees, which is how I have sat when something important needed to be said for as long as I can remember. I looked at my daughter's face, older than I had last seen it, quieter around the eyes, careful in ways she had not needed to be careful before, and I waited until she looked back at me. Then I said the two words I had not said out loud to another living person in 7 years. Little B. Emily Harper made a sound that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It was not a word. It was not a sob exactly. Though tears came immediately and completely, the way tears come when they have been waiting a very long time and have finally been given permission. It was the sound a person makes when something they did not know they had been holding finally releases a sound that starts in the chest and comes up through the throat with the force of 7 years of not knowing and not remembering, and not being able to explain why a color or a smell or a stranger's bracelet could make you stop breathing. She grabbed my hand with both of hers and held on. I held on back. Michael stood in the doorway behind us. I heard him make a sound of his own, short and sharp, and quickly controlled the sound of a man who has just understood something enormous and is choosing in this moment to stand in the doorway and let it be what it is. She cried for a long time. Not the quiet, composed crying of someone maintaining control, the other kind. The kind that has no interest in control, that comes up from somewhere below the place where decisions are made and does not ask permission. I kept her hand in both of mine, and I did not say anything, and I did not look away because she had spent 7 years not knowing who she was, and the least I could do was be completely present for the moment she started to find out. Dr. Reeves appeared in the doorway, checked something on the monitor, and withdrew without speaking. Michael had not moved from his position just inside the door. I could feel him behind me, the particular stillness of a man who loves someone and is watching that person go through something he cannot follow her into. When Emily finally steadied, she did not let go of my hand. I remember the smell first, she said, her voice rough and uneven, and completely herself in a way I had not dared to hope for. Every spring, when the first rows come in and it rained the night before, I used to go out before breakfast just to stand in it. You tracked mud into the kitchen every single time, I said. Every single spring for 20 years. A sound came out of her that was half sob and half laugh, and it was the most beautiful thing I had heard since November of 2017. I stopped being annoyed about it around year 4, I said. After that, I just put an extra mat by the door. She laughed again, short and wet and real, and squeezed my hand so hard that the bracelet pressed into my skin, and I was grateful for that, for the specific physical evidence that this was happening, and I was not asleep on my bench in the park, and dreaming the way grieving people dream when they have wanted something long enough. More pieces came. Not in order, not cleanly. They surfaced the way things surface when water has been covering them a long time. One edge appearing first, then another, the whole shape assembling slowly. The kitchen table with the crack along the left side that I had always meant to fix and never did. The specific sound the greenhouse door made when the wind was coming from the northwest. Pete Navarro's voice calling across the field on harvest mornings. Then she went quiet in a different way. Her grip on my hand tightened, her jaw set. She looked at me with eyes that had moved from grief into something harder and clearer, and I recognized the expression I had seen it on her face at 12 years old when she had decided something was wrong and was not going to let it go until she understood it. "Dad," she said, "I need to tell you something." "Tell me." There was a phone call. Her voice was deliberate now, each word placed with care. "I was calling you. I remember the cold, and I remember running, and I remember Ryan's hand on my arm. And then—" She stopped, breathed. "And then the next morning on the trail, he was behind me, and I remember thinking that something was wrong and turning around, and—" She stopped again. Her free hand came up and pressed flat against her sternum, against the hospital gown, against the place where the memory was sitting. "Dad." Her eyes met mine and held them without flinching. "Someone pushed me. It wasn't an accident. Someone pushed me off that mountain." Behind me, I heard Michael's breath leave his body in a single hard exhale, the sound of a man who has just had his world rearranged without warning and is deciding in real time what to do about it. I looked at my daughter's face, at the certainty in it, at the 7 years of survival in it. "I know," I said. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." Michael stepped forward and closed the door. She told it the way people tell things they have carried a long time without knowing. They were carrying them, not in order, not smoothly, with gaps, where the memory had not yet fully surfaced, and with sudden clear bursts where it had. Ryan had asked to join the trip in October. He had never shown interest in her volunteer work before. She had been pleased. She remembered being pleased, and the memory of that pleasure sat in her chest now like a coal. The second evening, she had gone back to the main cabin for a water filter she had forgotten. The cabin shared a wall with the equipment storage room, and the wall was thin. She heard Ryan's voice first, low and careful, the voice he used when he did not want to be overheard. Then another man's voice. She recognized a name, Pinnacle Group. Then a number, a purchase price she understood later, though at the time the figure had seemed too large to be real. He said, "After the transfer is complete," Emily said. Her hands were flat on the blanket, now pressed down as if she needed to hold something still. Not if, after, like it was already decided. She had run. She had called me from the trail, and she had gotten as far as Pinnacle Group, and Ryan has been talking to them since June before the phone was gone. Ryan's hand on her wrist, then on the phone, then his voice very quiet, saying, "Emily, come inside. It's cold." She had gone inside. She had lain awake all night in her sleeping bag, listening to him breathe 4 feet away, and telling herself she had misunderstood. "I hadn't misunderstood," she said. "No," I said. "You hadn't." On the trail the next morning, the group had spread out along a narrow section above a steep drainage choked with snow. Ryan had been directly behind her. She remembered the specific sound of his boots on the frozen ground. She remembered turning her head slightly, because something felt wrong in the way things feel wrong before you can name them. She did not remember the impact. She remembered the cold coming up fast, and the sky tilting, and then nothing until Michael's face above her, in the gray light of a winter afternoon, his voice saying her name, not her real name, a name he was trying. "Emily, can you hear me, Emily?" And even then, even with everything gone, something in her had responded to the sound of someone trying. She stopped talking. Michael had been standing against the wall with his arms crossed and his eyes on the floor, the posture of a man absorbing impacts and not yet ready to move. Now he straightened up and walked out of the room without a word. Emily watched him go. "He needs a minute," she said, and her voice carried a precision that told me she knew exactly what a minute looked like for Michael and was not alarmed by it. "He's a good man," I said. "He's the best man I know," she said simply, "which is why this is going to be hard for him. He doesn't like knowing that something happened to me that he couldn't prevent." We sat with that. Outside the window, Seattle had gone dark, and the lights of the city were coming on across the water. "Does Ryan know you're alive?" I asked. "No." I nodded slowly. Something was assembling itself in the part of my mind that had spent 30 years solving problems, not with anger, not with grief, but with the cold, patient logic of a man who has learned that the distance between a problem and a solution is almost always just work. Good, I said. That's the most important thing we have right now. Emily looked at me with an expression I recognized. She had worn it at 12 years old, at 16, at 22. The expression of a woman who has decided something and is waiting to see if the other person has caught up. You already have a plan, she said. The beginning of one, I said. I need to make a call. The door opened. Michael came back, and his eyes red-rimmed but dry, his jaw set in the manner of a man who has made a decision in a hallway and is ready to act on it. Tell me what you need, he said. Both of you. Tell me what you need and I'll do it. Olivia Grant had been my attorney for 25 years, which meant she had seen me in most of the conditions a person can be in, and had learned to read which condition I was in from the way I walked through her door. She was standing when I came in, which told me Linda had called ahead. Sit down, Daniel, she said. I'd rather stand. I know. Sit down anyway. I sat. Olivia Grant was 58 years old with silver hair. She kept short, and reading glasses she kept on a chain around her neck. Because she had lost 3 pairs in 6 months in 1987, and had decided that was enough of that. She had a quality of stillness that I had spent 25 years being grateful for, the stillness of someone who has heard most things and has learned that the first response to any piece of information is almost never the right one. I told her everything. She did not interrupt once. When I finished, she was quiet for 4 seconds, I counted, and then she opened the bottom drawer of her desk and placed a manila folder on the surface between us. It was thick. It had a rubber band around it and a strip of white tape along the spine on which she had written, in her precise handwriting, one word. Harper. I've been keeping this since 2021, she said. I tried to bring it to you twice. You weren't ready. I looked at the folder. I know. I'm not saying it as a criticism, Daniel. I'm saying it so you understand that you are not behind. You are exactly where the evidence needed you to be. She opened the folder and walked me through it with the methodical patience of someone who has organized information for courtrooms and knows the difference between what is significant and what merely feels significant. The financial reports first. Ryan had been filing quarterly summaries with the board, a board that since my withdrawal in 2018 consisted of Ryan, a retired banker named Whitfield, who played golf with Ryan twice a month, and an agricultural consultant in Spokane who had never once set foot on the farm. The summaries showed consistent, modest growth. The actual accounts told a different story. Over 7 years, through 23 intermediary accounts, some domestic, some routed through a financial services firm in the Cayman Islands. Ryan had moved $4.2 million out of Harper Lavender Farm's operating accounts. Wire fraud, Olivia said. Federal jurisdiction. Each transfer across state lines is a separate count under 18 U.S.C. 1343. Then the contracts. 11 agreements signed by Ryan as acting CEO, each one structured to benefit the counterparty in ways that generated undisclosed payments to a private LLC Ryan had registered in Delaware in January of 2018, 6 weeks after I handed him control of the company. Then the plant patent. I had spent 23 years developing the Harper Extended Bloom strain. 3 U.S. plant patents. The fragrance profile alone had been valued by an independent assessor at just over $3 million. In March of 2022, Ryan had filed a transfer of licensing rights with the United States Patent and Trademark Office using a notarized authorization that bore my signature. That is not my signature, I said. No, Olivia said. It is not. I had a forensic document examiner look at it in 2022 when I first found the filing. The pen pressure is wrong. The letter formation in your capital H deviates in 4 specific places from every authenticated document in our files going back 15 years. She looked at me over her reading glasses. Forgery, under 18 U.S.C. 471, also federal. I sat with that for a moment. 23 years of work. Transferred for $180,000 to a shell company that had since dissolved. The door opened. Pete Navarro walked in. 55 years old, wearing the same canvas jacket he wore in every season, holding his cap in both hands in front of him, the way he held it when he was in a situation he considered serious. His eyes were red at the rims. He had driven 2 hours from Sequim without apparently stopping once. He sat down across from me without being asked. He reached into his jacket and placed a USB drive on the desk beside Olivia's folder. 5 years, he said. His voice was rough. Every email I thought was wrong. Every number that didn't add up. Every contract I watched get signed that should have gone to a full board and didn't. He looked at me directly, and his jaw was tight with something that had been held in a long time. I tried to tell you in 2019, Daniel. You were sitting in the kitchen at the farm, and I drove out there specifically, and you looked at me and I could see that you weren't, that you couldn't. I know, I said. I should have pushed harder. Pete. I leaned forward. You stayed. You kept the farm running, and you kept collecting, and you stayed. That's what mattered. He nodded once tightly and looked at the USB drive on the desk between us. Ryan threatened to have me removed if I said anything else. Said he'd tell the board I'd been misappropriating equipment. His mouth tightened. I've worked that land for 20 years. I wasn't going anywhere. Olivia picked up the USB drive and looked at it, then at both of us. I'm going to make a call, she said. Her name is Lena Marsh. She's FBI Seattle Financial Crimes. I've worked with her before. She set the drive down. But I need to ask you something first, Daniel. Once I make this call, there is no version of events where we pull back. We go all the way or we don't go at all. Pete looked at me. I looked at the folder with my name on the spine. All the way, I said. Olivia's house was a narrow craftsman on Capitol Hill that she had owned since 1994 and had never once considered selling on the grounds that a person who changes houses every time something better comes along has confused real estate with character. The dining room table seated 6. That evening it seated 5, which felt exactly right, and also like the most important dinner table I had ever sat at, which was saying something because I had sat at a table in a farmhouse kitchen 30 years ago and decided to bet everything on 40 acres of lavender. Lena Marsh arrived last at 7:15, carrying a canvas messenger bag and the particular air of someone who has been doing difficult work since before most people finished their coffee and has made peace with that being the permanent condition of their life. She was 45, lean and direct with the kind of eyes that registered everything and gave back only what she decided to give back. She shook hands around the table without excess warmth and without coldness, the handshake of a professional who respects your time because she respects her own. FBI Seattle Financial Crimes, she said. Olivia briefed me this afternoon. I've reviewed the preliminary materials. She set her bag on the table and looked at Emily. You are Emily Harper. Emily Carter, Emily said. For the last 7 years. Emily Harper, Lena said not unkindly. That's going to matter in court. She opened her bag and placed 3 documents on the table with the efficiency of a person who has organized evidence for federal prosecution before and understands that clarity at the beginning saves weeks at the end. She walked us through the charges as she saw them: wire fraud under 18, USC 13, 43 securities, fraud, embezzlement, forgery, under 18. U.S. 471, attempted murder and conspiracy to commit all of the above. Federal jurisdiction, she said, because the financial transactions crossed state lines and international borders. That takes it out of Washington State Court and into the Western District, which is where we want it, because federal sentencing guidelines are substantially more serious than state. Michael asked the question I had been expecting him to ask. How long does this take? The investigation, 2 to 3 weeks to gather sufficient evidence for arrest warrants. Trial federal cases move at their own pace, a year, 14 months, sometimes longer. She looked at him directly. I know that's not the answer you wanted. It's the accurate answer, Michael said. That's what I wanted. Lena almost smiled. Almost. She laid out the operational requirements with the same brisk precision. Daniel continued meeting with Ryan exactly as normal, no deviation in behavior, no avoided phone calls, no change in pattern that a careful man might notice. Emily remained unknown to Ryan for as long as possible. Michael told no one at the hospital beyond Dr. Reeves, who was already inside the circle. Pete continued his daily operations at the farm without alteration. The moment Ryan suspects something has changed, Lena said, he will move assets, destroy records, and potentially flee. He has the resources and, based on what I've seen, the patience for it. We do not give him a reason to run before we are ready to catch him. Emily had been listening without speaking, her hands folded on the table in front of her, her eyes moving between Lena and the documents. Now she said, Marcus Webb. Lena looked at her. What about him? He was in that cabin. He heard everything Ryan said. He knows the timeline. Emily's voice was measured and precise, the voice of a woman who had spent the last several hours remembering things she had not known she still had access to. If he understands that cooperation is available to him, he might take it. Lena held Emily's gaze for a moment. I'll approach him this week, she said. Separately, carefully, and with a very clear picture of what his alternatives look like. Daniel's phone buzzed on the table. The screen read Ryan. The table went silent in the specific way of 5 people who have all just understood the same thing at the same moment. Emily looked at the phone. Then she looked at me. Her expression was composed and steady, and carried something in it I recognized from 30 years of watching her face, the expression she wore when she had decided something and was waiting to see if I had decided it too. I picked up the phone. Ryan. My voice came out even, unhurried. The voice of a grieving 60-year-old man on a Sunday evening with nothing particular on his mind. Good to hear from you. Ryan's voice filled the room, smooth and warm and perfectly calibrated the way it always was. He was calling to confirm the signing ceremony 3 weeks out. Everything on schedule, the Pinnacle Group lawyers had reviewed the final documents that afternoon. He just wanted to make sure I was still comfortable with the timeline. Of course, I said. You've handled everything exactly right, Ryan. I don't know what I would have done without you. A pause. Thank you, Daniel. That means a lot. Get some rest, I said. Big few weeks ahead. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the table. Lena was watching me with an expression that was the closest thing to approval I had seen on her face. 3 weeks, she said. That's enough time. Barely, but enough. Emily reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her bracelet caught the light from the overhead lamp, the small lavender sprig, the tiny letters, and for a moment I could not look away from it. We have one thing Ryan doesn't, she said quietly. What's that? Michael asked. Emily looked at her father. He thinks he already won, she said. Before we go further into what the FBI uncovered, drop lavender in the comments so I know you're still here. I was not in the room when most of it happened. That was the hardest part. Not the waiting itself, which I had 7 years of practice at, but the particular quality of this waiting, which was active and purposeful, and moving towards something which made the not knowing feel like a physical pressure rather than the dull, familiar weight I had learned to carry. Olivia called me each evening. Not with everything. Federal investigations do not work that way. And Lena had been precise about what could and could not leave her office, but with enough. A summary, a direction, the shape of what was building. The forensic accountant assigned to the case was a woman named Patricia Holt, 12 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, who had reviewed Pete's USB drive in its entirety over a 48-hour period, and emerged from that process with the particular focused energy of someone who has found exactly what they were looking for and is now angry about it in a professional capacity. $4.2 million. 23 intermediary accounts. 7 years of transfers so precisely structured that each individual transaction fell below the $10,000 threshold that triggers automatic federal reporting requirements, a technique called structuring, which is itself a federal crime under 31 U.S.C. 5324, regardless of whether the underlying funds are legitimate. He was careful, Olivia told me on the third evening, but careful in a way that requires a pattern, and patterns are what forensic accountants exist to find. The plant patent forgery was confirmed within the first week. The forensic document examiner Lena used a specialist from the University of Washington, who had testified in 41 federal cases, identified 14 specific deviations from my authenticated signature across 3 different documents. 14. Ryan had forged my name at least 3 times over 7 years, each time believing the gap between the signing and the discovery would be wide enough that the details would blur. He had not counted on Pete Navarro keeping originals. 3 former employees came forward once Pete reached out, men and women Ryan had dismissed over the years for asking inconvenient questions about numbers that did not add up. All 3 had kept records of their own. All 3 agreed to testify. Then came Marcus Webb. Lena approached him on a Tuesday morning at his office in Bellevue, which is the kind of city where real estate developers keep offices in buildings with names, and where the arrival of 2 FBI agents in the lobby produces a very specific quality of stillness in everyone who witnesses it. Marcus Webb was 50 years old and had spent his career in transactions that moved fast and did not always bear close examination, and he understood, within approximately 4 minutes of Lena sitting down across from him, exactly what his situation was. He asked for 24 hours to consult his attorney. He called back in 19. His attorney had negotiated a proffer agreement, a formal arrangement under federal law, in which a witness provides information to investigators under limited protection with the understanding that truthful cooperation can lead to reduced charges or immunity. Marcus Webb sat down with Lena and 2 federal prosecutors on a Thursday afternoon and talked for 3 hours. He confirmed that Ryan had contacted Pinnacle Group in June of 2017. He confirmed the figure discussed. He confirmed that Ryan had told him in a phone call in December of 2017 that the family situation had been resolved and the timeline could proceed. December of 2017. 1 month after Emily went into the snow. He used those words, Olivia told me. The family situation has been resolved. Marcus Webb heard them and wrote them down and kept the note for 7 years because he was not entirely comfortable with what they implied and wanted a record in case he ever needed one. I sat in my kitchen and looked at the wall and thought about a man in an expensive office in Bellevue writing down 6 words because something about them made him uneasy, and keeping that note for 7 years, and how the entire structure of what Ryan had built was being disassembled right now because people had kept things Pete, his records, Marcus, his note, Olivia, her folder, and how Ryan had planned for everything except the human tendency to hold on to the evidence of what you witnessed because some part of you always knew it would matter. Lena called on a Friday morning. Judge Sandra Okafor signed the arrest warrant this morning, she said. Western District. We're ready. A pause. The signing ceremony is in 10 days. I need Emily in that room, Daniel. I need her ready to walk through that door. I looked out the kitchen window toward the water. She's been ready, Wata, for 7 years. Dr. Reeves had a method. She had developed it over 7 years of working with Emily, refining it the way a person refines any tool that has to do delicate work slowly, with attention to what caused damage and what caused progress, and with the understanding that the difference between those two things was not always obvious until after the fact. The sessions happened in the morning in a small room at the clinic on Madison Street that had 2 chairs, a window, overlooking a courtyard, where someone had planted rosemary along the south wall, and a deliberate absence of anything that might compete for attention. Emily sat in the chair facing the window. Dr. Reeves sat at an angle close enough to be present, far enough to not be imposing. Between them on a small table was a legal pad. Start with what you're certain of, Dr. Reeves said, in the first session after everything had changed. Not what you think you remember, what you know. Emily picked up the pen. What she knew, it turned out, was more than either of them had expected. She knew the layout of the cabin, the thin wall between the common room and the storage area, the way sound carried through it when the wind dropped. She knew the exact phrase Marcus Webb had used after the transfer is complete. She knew Ryan's voice in the storage room, low and careful, the voice he used when he did not want to be overheard, which she recognized because she had heard it before, on phone calls he took in the garage at home with the door shut, and had never asked about, because she had told herself there was nothing to ask about. She had told herself that several times, she wrote. About several things. She underlined it once and moved on. She knew the feel of her phone being taken. The specific grip Ryan's left hand because he reached across her with his left hand, which meant he was already positioned on her right side before she realized he was close enough to do it. She knew the words he said immediately after Emily come inside, it's cold. She knew the tone of those words, which was the tone of a man who has just made a decision and is managing the aftermath of it. She knew the sound of the boots on the frozen trail the next morning. She stopped writing for a moment at that point. Dr. Reeves watched her and said nothing. Emily pressed the pen against the pad, not writing, just pressing, and then she looked up. I always knew something was wrong, she said. I knew it that night in the cabin, and I knew it lying in that sleeping bag, and I knew it on the trail the next morning when I could hear him behind me. I just kept deciding not to know it. Her voice was steady, but her hand on the pen was not. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it today, Dr. Reeves said. Write it down and keep going. Emily wrote it down and kept going. By the end of the 3rd session, she had 14 pages. By the end of the 2nd week, she had 22, and Dr. Reeves had confirmed what Lena needed to hear. The account was internally consistent, temporally coherent, and specific enough in its physical and sensory details to withstand the kind of cross-examination that federal defense attorneys applied to witness testimony. Michael read the statement on a Tuesday evening. All 22 pages sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold before he got through the first section. Emily sat across from him and watched him read the way you watch someone walk through a place you know well, and they are seeing for the first time. When he finished, he did not speak for a long moment. He looked at his hands on the table. Then he looked up. You carried all of this, he said. For 7 years you carried all of this and you didn't even know you were carrying it. I didn't know what it was, Emily said. I just knew there was weight. Michael nodded slowly, the nod of a man incorporating something large into a structure that has to keep standing regardless. He reached across the table and turned her wrist gently so the bracelet caught the kitchen light. He looked at it for a long moment, the lavender sprig, the two small words, and Emily watched his face move through something she recognized as the same rearrangement she had seen in the hospital hallway after he came back from his minute alone. "I used to wonder," he said quietly, "why you always stopped in front of flower shops. Why purple made you go somewhere I couldn't follow you." He looked up from the bracelet to her face. "I thought it was just something in you. I didn't know it was something you'd lost." Emily turned her hand over and held his. "You loved the part of me that survived," she said. "That was enough to bring the rest back." The next morning she told me she was ready to go home to Sequim. The drive from Seattle to Sequim takes just under 2 hours on a clear day west on the 101 along the southern shore of the Hood Canal, through timber country and small towns that have been there long enough to stop trying to explain themselves to anyone passing through. Emily did not sleep. She sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap and watched the water move past the window, and I did not talk because she did not need talking to. She needed the miles. She needed the particular therapy of distance being covered between one place and another. The body understanding something is changing before the mind has caught up to what. The farm appeared around a long curve in the road, the way it always had. The wooden sign first, Harper, Lavender Farm. The letters dark against weathered cedar, and then the fields themselves opening up on both sides of the lane. November fields stripped and waiting the rows running parallel to the horizon. In that precise geometry I had spent 30 years maintaining the soil, turned dark from the autumn rains. Emily made a sound I had no name for, not words. Not crying exactly. The sound a person makes when something they did not know they had been holding for 7 years decides without asking permission to let go all at once. I stopped the truck at the top of the lane and did not move. She got out. She walked into the field the way she used to walk into it when she was 12 years old and had something to work out. Not fast, not with any particular destination, just moving through the rows with her hands trailing along the bare stems, her boots finding the familiar gaps between the plants, her body remembering a geometry it had learned before she had words for it. Pete Navarro came out of the equipment barn. He saw her from 40 feet away and stopped walking entirely. He was holding a wrench in his right hand, and he lowered it slowly to his side without appearing to notice he was doing it. He looked at Emily, moving through the rows, and his face did something I had only seen it do twice in 20 years, once when his mother died, and once when the late frost of 2019 took out an entire section of the experimental plot that he had spent 8 months cultivating. He took his cap off. He stood there with his cap in both hands, the way he had sat in Olivia's office, and he did not move until Emily looked up and saw him. She walked to him. He opened his arms the way a man opens his arms when he has run out of words and has decided that arms will have to do. She walked into them, and he held on with the grip of someone who has been waiting a long time to put something down in the right place. "You kept it alive," she said into his shoulder. Pete shook his head. His jaw was working. "It kept itself alive," he said, his voice rough and fractured at the edges. "Lavender doesn't need much, just the right soil and someone to remember to water it." He pulled back and looked at her face with the specific attention of a man checking that something is real and not a trick of the light. Then he nodded, once put his cap back on and said, "I'll put the kettle on," which was the most Pete Navarro thing that had ever been said, and Emily laughed, a real one, full and sudden, and the sound of it went out across the empty rows and the dark soil and the November sky. And I stood at the top of the lane and let it land where it needed to land. I did not follow them inside. I stood at the gate and looked at the farm. My farm still. My farm, whatever Ryan had tried to make of it, and I felt something I had not felt standing on this ground in 7 years. Not peace, exactly. Something harder than peace and more useful. The particular resolve of a man who knows what he is fighting for and has confirmed by standing in front of it that it is worth fighting for. Behind me, tires on the road slowed. A black SUV rolled past the gate at a speed that was not quite stopping and not quite passing through. It slowed enough that the driver could see the truck parked at the top of the lane. Then it continued. I noted the model, the partial plate, the direction it turned at the end of the road. I took out my phone and called Lena Marsh. "Ryan just drove past the farm," I said. "He saw my truck." A pause. "Did he stop?" "No." "Then we're still all right," she said. "But Daniel, 10 days just became 9. Don't give him another reason to slow down and look." Ryan's office was on the 15th floor of a building on 4th Avenue that had gone up in 2019 and still had the particular self-satisfaction of new construction clean lines, floor-to-ceiling glass. The kind of lobby where the lighting has been designed to make everyone who walks through it look like they belong there, regardless of whether they do. I had been in this office 11 times in 7 years. I had never once seen it clearly until now. Ryan was at his desk when his assistant showed me in, and he stood and came around to shake my hand with the warmth he always deployed for me, both hands, a firm grip, genuine-seeming eye contact held for exactly the right duration. He was 38 years old, and he was very good at this. He had always been very good at this. I understood now that the goodness of it was the point that it had been practiced the way you practice anything you intend to rely on. "Dad." He squeezed my shoulder. "I'm glad you came in. Sit down, sit down. You want coffee? Karen makes a good cup." "I'm fine," I said. I sat. He sat across from me and leaned back in his chair with the relaxed confidence of a man who is 3 days away from the largest transaction of his professional life and has no reason to believe anything is wrong. He had a manila folder open on his desk, the Pinnacle Group documents I understood, and he rested one hand on it with the casual proprietary ease of someone resting a hand on something that already belongs to them. "I wanted to check in after the drive-by yesterday," I said. "I was out at the farm with Olivia. Some paperwork. I thought I saw your car." Something moved behind his eyes. Fast and small and immediately managed. "I was coming back from a site visit in Port Angeles," he said. "Took the scenic route." He smiled. "Old habit. I always liked that drive." "Me too," I said. We looked at each other across the desk, and I thought about what Emily had said about knowing something was wrong and choosing not to know it. And I thought about how I had done the same thing for 7 years, and how the choosing not to know had felt from the inside exactly like trust. Ryan walked me through the final documents with the thoroughness of a man who wants to be seen being thorough. The purchase price, the transition timeline, the arrangements for the staff, Pete and the seasonal workers, a severance package that was described as generous and was structured, I now understood, to ensure that the people who knew the farm best would have every financial reason to leave quietly and quickly. He paused on that section, looked at me. "Pete's been with you a long time," he said. "I want to make sure he's taken care of." The specific cruelty of that sentence delivered in that tone with that expression cost me something I am not going to try to quantify. I looked back at Ryan Brooks, and I thought about Pete Navarro standing in Olivia's office with a USB drive and red-rimmed eyes, and I kept my face exactly where it needed to be. "That's thoughtful," I said. "Emily always said you had a generous heart." He held my gaze for a moment. Something flickered. "She did, all the time," I said. He looked down at the folder. His jaw moved slightly, a small adjustment, a micro-expression that was there and gone before I could have named it to anyone who asked me to. Then he looked up and the expression was clear again, composed and warm and entirely unreadable. "I miss her," he said. "Every day." I let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds, which is how long genuine grief needs before it responds. "So do I said. "Every single day." He walked me to the elevator himself, hand on my shoulder, telling me about the post-signing celebration. He was planning a dinner, a few close colleagues, nothing elaborate. He said he wanted me there. He said it wouldn't feel right without me. I told him I wouldn't miss it. The elevator doors closed and I stood alone in the small mirrored box and looked at my own reflection and at the bracelet on my right wrist, and I breathed in and I breathed out, and I let the next 3 days exist in front of me as a finite thing, a countable thing, a thing that had a beginning and a middle and an end that I already knew. In the lobby, I took out my phone. 3 days, I said when Lena picked up. Everything is still in place. He doesn't know. Good, Lena said. Keep it that way until Thursday morning. And Thursday morning, a pause that contained, I thought, the closest thing to satisfaction I had heard from her in 3 weeks. Thursday morning, she said, we finish it. Olivia's dining room table had seen 3 weeks of evidence and strategy and late-night phone calls, and by Wednesday evening, it had taken on the particular quality of a space that has been used for serious work long enough to carry the weight of it in the air itself, in the slight smell of cold coffee and printed documents, and the specific tension of people who have been thinking hard about the same thing for a long time and are almost, but not yet done. Lena arrived at 7 with a folder and the focused efficiency of someone running through a final checklist in her head while conducting a conversation with her mouth. She confirmed the operational details without ceremony. 6 FBI agents would be present at the signing ceremony in plainclothes, 2 positioned as journalists, 2 as observers from a regulatory body, 2 in the building lobby. The arrest warrant signed by Judge Sandra Okafor of the Western District was valid and ready to execute. Marcus Webb had confirmed his attendance and his cooperation. He would sit at the table, he would not intervene, and he would step aside the moment the agents moved. Emily goes in when Ryan picks up the pen, Lena said. Not before. The moment the pen is in his hand and he is committed to signing, that is when the door opens, not a second earlier. Pete asked if he could be there. Lena looked at him across the table. You drove 2 hours in the middle of the night with a USB drive and 5 years of your life on it, she said. Yes, you can be there. Pete nodded and looked at the table and did not say anything else, but his hands, which had been tight on the arms of his chair since he sat down, loosened for the first time all evening. After Lena left, I drove to Emily and Michael's house on the east side of Queen Anne. Michael opened the door before I knocked. He had been watching for my headlights. I understood which was the kind of thing Michael Carter did without being asked, and without mentioning that he had done it. Emily was in the kitchen, standing at the counter, and she had the 22-page statement in front of her, even though she did not need to read it anymore, had not needed to read it for 10 days, because she had stopped needing to read it the moment she understood that the words on those pages were not a reconstruction, but a return, not something she had built from fragments, but something that had always been there waiting under 7 years of silence for someone to give it back to her. She looked up when I came in. How did the meeting with Lena go? She's ready, I said. Everything is in place. Michael put a cup of coffee in front of me without asking whether I wanted one, which I did, and sat down at the table in the way of a man who has decided his role in this particular moment is to be present and solid and not to require anything of anyone. Are you all right? I asked Emily. She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. I'm angry, she said. I've been angry for 3 weeks, and I expect I'll be angry for a while after tomorrow. But underneath the angry, she paused. Underneath it, I'm all right. I know what I'm walking into. I know what I'm going to say. And I know what I'm walking out of. I drove home alone. The house was quiet, in the way houses are quiet, when you have lived in them long enough that the silence has a specific texture, not empty, not lonely, just the accumulated quiet of 30 years of a life that was mostly good and partly broken and still somehow standing. I went out to the back garden. The November garden had the stripped, patient look of things that have given everything they had for the season and are waiting to be asked to do it again. I sat on the wooden bench along the south wall. The bench my wife Maggie had insisted on 20 years ago, Maggie, who had been gone 12 years herself, and who had always understood things about gardens and grief that I was still learning, because she said every garden needed a place where a person could sit and not be productive. And I looked at the dark shapes of the rose canes against the fence, and I did something I had not done in 7 years. I talked to Emily. Not the Emily who was alive and sleeping 2 miles away, with her bracelet on her wrist, and her statement memorized, and her husband's hand somewhere near hers in the dark. The other one. The Emily of 7 years of Sunday mornings and empty chairs, and a farmhouse I had stopped going back to, because every room in it asked me a question I could not answer. I'm sorry I believed them. I said to the dark garden, and the rose canes, and the November sky pressing low and cold over Seattle. I'm sorry I didn't ask harder questions. I'm sorry I gave him everything you built with me. I pressed my thumb against the bracelet. Tomorrow I'm going to finish it. And I need you to know the version of you I carried for 7 years is the reason I'm still here to do it. The garden did not answer. It did not need to. I went inside. I set my alarm for 5:30. I lay down on my side of the bed, my side still after all these years, the left side, the side with the better angle to the window. And I looked at the ceiling, and I thought about a little girl following a honeybee across 3 rows of lavender, and deciding at 4 years old with complete certainty that it was hers. My phone buzzed at 5:45. Lena Marsh, it's time. Before that door opens, comment dadfamilyrevenge below, because what happens next is something he never saw coming. The building was on 2nd Avenue, 32 floors of glass and steel that had gone up during the tech boom and had never quite decided whether it was trying to impress the city or simply contain it. The lobby had marble floors and a security desk and a wall of elevator banks, and at 7:45 on a Thursday morning, it was full of the particular purposeful energy of people going to work who did not know that the building they were walking into was about to become the location of something they would describe to other people for years. I rode up to the 22nd floor alone. The conference room was already arranged when I walked in. A long table, 12 chairs, water pitchers at intervals, the kind of floral centerpiece that corporate event planners deploy when they want a space to feel significant without feeling personal. 4 journalists from 2 business publications sat along the window wall, notebooks open. 3 bankers from the financing consortium occupied chairs on the left. The Pinnacle Group's legal team, 4 attorneys in matching blue suits, sat in a row on the right, with the synchronized stillness of people who bill by the hour and have learned to be motionless as a professional discipline. Marcus Webb was already seated at the far end of the table. He looked at me when I came in. His face was the face of a man who has made a decision he cannot unmake, and has decided that the only thing left to do is hold very still and let it play out. I gave him the smallest nod I could manage. He looked away. Ryan came in at 8 o'clock exactly. He was wearing the charcoal suit he saved for important occasions. I had seen it twice before, once at Emily's funeral, and once at a regional agricultural award ceremony, where he had accepted an industry recognition on behalf of the farm with a speech that had made 3 people cry. He moved through the room with the ease of a man arriving at his own party, shaking hands, saying names, deploying the full warmth of the version of himself he had spent 7 years constructing for exactly this audience. He reached me last. Dad. Both hands. The grip. The eye contact. Thank you for being here. It means everything. I wouldn't be anywhere else, I said. He held my gaze for 1 beat longer than usual. Whatever he was looking for, he appeared to find it, or to find the absence of what he was afraid of, which amounted to the same thing. He moved to the head of the table. The Pinnacle Group's lead attorney stood and walked through the documents: purchase price, transition terms, representations and warranties, closing conditions. The room had the focused quiet of people listening to language that will cost or earn them significant amounts of money. Ryan sat at the head of the table with his hands folded and his face composed into the expression of a man presiding over the completion of something he had worked very hard for. He had worked very hard for it. That was the thing I kept coming back to, sitting in my chair with my hands flat on my thighs, and the bracelet pressing into the underside of my wrist. He had worked very hard for it, and he had been patient, and he had been careful, and he had been willing to do the thing that I still could not say plainly to myself even now, even knowing all of it, even sitting 12 feet away from him in a room full of people who did not know what I knew. The attorney finished, slid the signature pages across to Ryan. Ryan picked up the pen. The room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something official is about to happen. Not dramatic, not anticipatory, just the natural compression of attention toward a single point. Ryan looked down at the first page. The conference room door opened. Not explosively, not with announcement. It opened the way doors open when the person on the other side has decided they are going in and has not left any room in that decision for the possibility of not going in. Emily walked into the room. She was wearing a gray blazer over a white shirt, and she had her hair pulled back, and she walked with the particular directness of a person who has had 7 years taken from them and has decided, having gotten them back, not to waste another second of what comes after. She did not look at the journalists. She did not look at the bankers or the attorneys or Marcus Webb, who had closed his eyes the moment the door opened. She looked at Ryan. Ryan looked up from the signature page. The pen dropped from his fingers and hit the table and rolled 2 inches and stopped. His face did not go pale gradually, the way faces go pale in films, with a slow draining of color that gives everyone time to prepare. It went pale all at once, the way a light goes out present, and then not color, and then the absence of it in a single moment that had no transition. His mouth opened. The sound that came out was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when their body has received information that their mind is refusing to process, and neither system knows how to proceed. "No," he said finally. His voice came from somewhere far below his chest. That's not your—" Emily stopped at the center of the table, equidistant from every person in the room, and she looked at Ryan Brooks with the level, clear-eyed steadiness of a woman who practiced being steady for 7 years, without knowing why, and now knows exactly why. "Hello, Ryan," she said. The door opened again behind her. Lena Marsh walked in. 2 agents flanked her, and 2 more came through the secondary entrance on the left wall that the journalists had probably assumed led to a storage closet. Lena held the arrest warrant at her side, not raised, not displayed, simply present the way a fact is present once it has been stated. She looked at Ryan. "Ryan Brooks," she said. "FBI, you're under arrest." Pete Navarro stepped out from the corner where he had been standing since 7:30. He had come in with me as a farm representative, and no one had asked him to explain himself further than that, because Pete Navarro has never in his life looked like a man who needed to explain himself. And he folded his arms across his chest, and he looked at Ryan Brooks with the expression of a man who has waited 5 years for a specific moment and finds now that it has arrived, that it is exactly as he imagined it would be. I did not watch Ryan being handcuffed. I watched Emily. She stood in the center of the room, while the machinery of consequence moved around her agents and attorneys, and the sound of Ryan's voice rising, now finding words, finally, the wrong words. The words of a man trying to explain something that has no explanation, and she stood through all of it with her shoulders back, and her chin level, and her hands at her sides, and she did not shake, and she did not flinch, and she did not look away from what was happening. When they walked Ryan past her toward the door, he turned his head and looked at her directly for the first and only time since she had walked in. She met his eyes and held them and said nothing. She did not need to. Everything that needed to be said had already been said 7 years ago on a mountain in November, and everything that needed to be answered was being answered right now in this room in front of these people with his hands behind his back and her standing exactly where she had decided to stand. I crossed the room. She turned when she heard me coming, and I opened my arms, and she stepped into them, the way she had stepped into the field at Sequim, without hesitation, without reservation, with the total and unreserved commitment of someone who has found the place they are supposed to be and has no intention of leaving it again. She did not cry this time. Neither did I. We had done our crying. What was left was something quieter and more permanent, as something that did not need expression, because it already had a shape, the shape of a bracelet on a wrist. A name pressed into silver. A little girl who had once decided that something was hers and had been right about it all along. Lena read Ryan his Miranda rights in the measured, unhurried cadence of someone who has done this enough times to understand that the words matter and that rushing them serves no one. Ryan stood with his hands behind his back and his eyes fixed on a point somewhere above the window line, and his jaw set in the rigid, locked manner of a man who has decided that whatever happens next, his face will not be the thing that gives anything away. It was, I thought, the most honest I had ever seen him. The charges took 45 seconds to enumerate. Attempted murder, wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. 1343, securities fraud, embezzlement, forgery under 18 U.S.C. 471, conspiracy to commit all of the above. Each one landed in the room with the particular weight of a thing that has been true for a long time and is only now being said out loud. And I watched the journalists along the window wall lean forward in their chairs, notebooks moving, and I thought about how this would look in print tomorrow morning, and felt nothing about that except a distant functional satisfaction that the record would exist. Ryan's attorney came through the door at a run briefcase in one hand, phone in the other, his face carrying the expression of a man who has just received a call he was not prepared for, despite having on some level been waiting for it. He started talking immediately, a rapid professional cascade of objections and procedural challenges that Lena received without expression and deflected with a single sentence. The warrant is signed by Judge Sandra Okafor, Western District. You're welcome to review it. She held it out. He took it. He read it. He stopped talking. Marcus Webb stood up from the far end of the table. He did not require handcuffs. That had been part of the arrangement. His cooperation agreement specified that he would present himself voluntarily to the FBI following the arrest and would be processed separately without restraint in acknowledgement of his assistance. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair and put it on with the deliberate movements of a man who is doing something he has been thinking about for a long time and wants to do it with as much dignity as the situation allows. He walked past Ryan on his way to the door. Ryan turned his head and looked at Marcus Webb with an expression that I will not try to describe in full because some expressions are not built from emotions that have names. Marcus Webb did not look back. He walked out the door, and that was the last time I saw him in person, though I would hear his voice many times over the following 11 months, in a federal courthouse on Stewart Street, answering questions in the flat, careful tone of a man who has decided that precision is his best remaining asset. The journalists were on their phones before Ryan reached the elevator. I watched Pete Navarro. He was still in his corner, arms still crossed, and he watched Ryan being walked across the conference room with an expression that I had been waiting to see on his face for 3 weeks. Not triumph, not anger, not any of the things that would have been understandable and human and entirely reasonable. Just the quiet, complete exhale of a man who has been holding something for a very long time and has finally been given permission to set it down. He uncrossed his arms. That was all. He just uncrossed his arms and let them hang at his sides, and something in the set of his shoulders changed some tension I had become so accustomed to that I had stopped noticing it was there, and he looked for the first time in a long time like a man standing on ground that belonged to him. "Pete," I said. He looked at me. "Go home," I said. "Go back to the farm. I'll be there by the weekend." His throat moved. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, okay." He put his cap on. "The south field needs turning before the frost hits." "Then turn it," I said. He nodded and walked out, and I heard his boots on the hallway floor, and then the sound of the elevator, and then nothing. And I was glad he was going back to the farm, because the farm needed him, and he needed the farm, and some things are as simple as that, even when everything around them is complicated. Emily was at the window. She had moved there at some point during the process. I had not seen her move, had been watching other things, and now she was standing at the glass, looking out at the November city, with her arms loosely crossed and her weight on one foot, and her bracelet catching the gray morning light. She looked like a woman thinking something through. She looked like a woman who has arrived somewhere she has been trying to get to for a long time, and is taking a moment to register that she is actually there. Michael appeared in the doorway. He had been in the hallway for the past hour. I had known he was there, had known he would be there, had not needed to check, because Michael Carter was the kind of man who was where he said he would be, and had been there since before you thought to look. Emily turned from the window when she heard him come in. He crossed the room and put both arms around her from behind, and she leaned back into him, and they stood like that at the window, with the city spread out below them. And I turned away because some things are not for fathers to watch, and some things are exactly for fathers to watch. And this was both at once, and I was not sure which feeling was stronger. Lena appeared at my elbow. "It's done," she said. "The beginning of it," I said. "The trial will take what it takes," she said. "But the part you needed to do, the part that required you to be in a room with him and hold it together and not show him what you knew, that part is done." She looked at me with the direct evaluating attention she brought to everything. "You did it well." I looked out the window at Seattle in November, the water and the low clouds and the particular silver light of a morning that had started one way and become something entirely different. "I had good people," I said. Lena almost smiled. The same almost as 3 weeks ago. I was beginning to understand that almost was as far as it went, and that it was enough. I crossed the room to the window where Emily and Michael were standing. Emily turned when she heard me, and Michael stepped back to give us room. And Emily looked at my face and I looked at hers, and neither of us said anything for a moment. Because there was too much to say, and we had already said the most important parts in a hospital room, and a lavender field and a dark garden, and a room full of people who were still talking on their phones about what they had just witnessed. "Let's go home," I said. Emily reached out, and took my right hand in both of hers, the same way she had in the hospital room 3 weeks ago, and she turned my wrist gently so the bracelet faced upward, and she looked at it for a moment, the lavender sprig, the two small words, and then she looked up at me. "Yes," she said. "Let's go home." The federal case moved at the pace federal cases move, not fast. Not the way television suggests these things move with dramatic reversals in a single afternoon and verdicts delivered before the commercial break. It moved the way serious things move when serious people are doing them correctly, methodically, with attention to what the evidence actually supported, rather than what any of us wished it supported, with the kind of patience that the justice system demands, and that I had by this point in my life developed enough of to recognize as a feature rather than a flaw. 11 months. Ryan had been denied bail at his initial appearance. The magistrate cited flight risk and the severity of the charges, and his attorney's argument that a man with deep community ties posed no danger to disappear had not persuaded anyone in that courtroom, including Ryan himself, judging by his expression when the ruling came down. I will not walk you through every day of it. There were too many days, and most of them were not dramatic in the way people expect courtrooms to be dramatic. There were motions filed and argued and ruled upon. There was discovery, the formal exchange of evidence between prosecution and defense that produces boxes and boxes of documents, and weeks of attorney time, and very little that is interesting to anyone who was not trained to find it interesting. There was jury selection, which took 9 days and produced 12 people who had agreed under oath to decide what was true, based only on what they were shown in that room. What they were shown was enough. Pete Navarro testified on the 4th day of the trial proper. He sat in the witness chair in the federal courthouse on Stewart Street, a building that has processed enough of the serious business of human consequence to have arrived at a kind of institutional gravity. The gravity of a place where things are decided that cannot be undecided. And he answered every question in the same voice he used to tell me the south field needed turning. Flat. Certain. Without embellishment and without hesitation. He had 5 years of records on that USB drive, and he knew every entry in them, and he walked the jury through 7 years of systematic financial misconduct with the methodical patience of a man who has been waiting a long time to say what he knows and has decided now that he is finally saying it, to say it completely. When the defense attorney finished his cross-examination, Pete stepped down from the witness stand and walked past the defense table without looking at Ryan and took his seat in the gallery next to Olivia Grant, and Olivia put her hand briefly on his arm, and Pete looked straight ahead, and that was that. Marcus Webb testified on the 7th day. He was precise and cooperative and specific in the way of a man who understands that his future depends on the quality of his truthfulness and has decided to be as truthful as he has ever been about anything. He confirmed the June 2017 contact. He confirmed the purchase price that had been discussed in that cabin in the North Cascades while Emily listened through a thin wall. He confirmed the phone call in December of 2017, the family situation has been resolved, and he confirmed that he had understood what those words meant and had written them down and kept the note because something about them had made him deeply uneasy and he had wanted a record. The defense attorney spent 40 minutes trying to establish that Marcus Webb was a self-interested witness whose testimony had been purchased through immunity. Marcus Webb agreed that he had a cooperation agreement, confirmed the terms of it without being asked, and then said in the particular tone of a man who has decided that honesty is his only remaining dignity that the agreement did not change what he had heard or what he had written down or what he had been uneasy about for 7 years. The jury leaned forward when he said that. Dr. Susan Reeves testified to Emily's medical history, the nature of the injury, its consistency, with a fall from height onto snow-covered terrain, the 7-year course of treatment, the gradual and then sudden recovery of memory that had begun the morning 3 children in yellow jackets had run ahead of their grandmother in a Seattle park. She was precise and credentialed, and she had a way of explaining complex neurological concepts in language that made them accessible without making them feel simplified. And by the time she stepped down, the jury understood exactly what had been taken from Emily in November of 2017 and what it had cost her to get it back. Emily testified on the 9th day. She walked to the witness stand the way she had walked into the conference room 11 months before, without hesitation, without performance, with the specific directness of a person who has decided that the only way through a thing is straight through it. She was sworn in. She sat down. She adjusted the microphone with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who intends to use it properly. A USA. Catherine Brennan, the lead federal prosecutor, a compact, precise woman who delivered questions the way a carpenter drives nails, one clean stroke at a time, took Emily through the sequence of events from April of 2017 through November, through the cabin, and the phone call, and the trail, and the 7 years after. Emily answered every question in the same level, direct tone she had used with Dr. Reeves in the clinic on Madison Street. She did not editorialize. She did not perform. She said what happened in the order it happened, in language clear enough that the 12 people in the jury box could follow it without effort, and precise enough that the defense attorney's cross-examination produced nothing of use. Ryan did not look at Emily during her testimony. He looked at the defense table, at his hands, at a point somewhere to the left of the witness stand where there was nothing to look at but the wall. I sat in the 3rd row of the gallery, and I watched my daughter describe what had been done to her with a clarity and a steadiness that cost her something. I could see it costing her, could see the specific effort in the set of her jaw and the deliberate evenness of her breathing. And I thought about the workshop behind the farmhouse, and a February night, and a tool made from a finishing nail, and the 2 words I had pressed into a piece of silver for a 10-year-old girl who had asked me to make her something she could carry. She had carried it. Through everything. Through 7 years of not knowing who she was, or where she came from, or why the color purple made her stop and stand still in the middle of a sidewalk. She had carried it, and it had carried her, and now she was here in this room, in this chair, under oath, saying what was true in front of the people whose job it was to decide what truth meant in the eyes of the law. Judge Sandra Okafor had presided over the trial with the particular patience of a jurist who has heard most things and has learned that the cases which appear most complex are often the ones where the facts, once properly assembled, are entirely clear. She was 52 years old, with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses she wore on her nose rather than on a chain, and she ran her courtroom with an efficiency that communicated without ever saying it directly that she considered the time of every person in the room to be valuable and had no intention of wasting any of it. When the jury returned after 3 days of deliberation, 3 days that I spent at the farm in Sequam with Pete turning the south field and repairing the fence line along the east boundary, and doing the physical work that my hands knew how to do when my mind needed something to hold on to, Judge Okafor received the verdict form, read it without visible expression, and then looked up at the courtroom. "On all counts," she said, "the jury finds the defendant guilty." Ryan stood at the defense table and received this information the way he had received most information in his life, with his face composed and his posture correct, and the internal machinery of whatever he was actually feeling kept entirely out of view. His attorney put a hand on his arm. Ryan did not move. At sentencing 3 weeks later, Judge Okafor applied the federal sentencing guidelines to a case involving attempted murder, sustained financial fraud exceeding $4 million, forgery of federal documents, and 7 years of systematic conspiracy, and she arrived at a number: 28 years. Ryan was 38 years old. He was led out of the courtroom through the side door, and he turned at the threshold and looked back at the gallery, and his eyes found me in the third row. And I looked back at him, and I did not look away, and I did not look down, and I did not give him anything, because there was nothing left that belonged to him. The door closed. Emily was sitting to my left, and Michael to her left, and Olivia beyond him, and Pete at the end of the row, with his cap in his hands, and the courtroom was doing what courtrooms do when a verdict has been delivered, and the business of the day is complete, filling with sound and movement, people standing and gathering their things, the ordinary machinery of a building returning to its ordinary function. Emily put her hand on my arm. "Dad," she said. I looked at her. "It's done," she said. I covered her hand with mine. "Yes," I said, "it's done." The Sunday after the verdict, I went back to the bench. Not because I had planned to. Maggie used to say that the places we return to without planning to return to them are the places that still have something to give us. And I had learned over 60 years of living that she was usually right about things like that. I drove to Waterfront Park without deciding to drive there, parked without deciding to park, and walked through the East Gate under the gray October sky, and found the bench the way you find things you have been going to long enough that your feet know the way without being told. It was not empty. Emily was already there. She was sitting at the far end, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, watching the ferries cross Elliott Bay with the same patient attention I had brought to this bench every Sunday for 7 years. She turned when she heard my footsteps on the path, and she did not look surprised to see me, which told me she had understood something about this bench and what it meant, and had decided on her own that this was where the morning should be spent. Michael stood a few feet back, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the 3 children race each other to the water's edge with the focused parental attention of a man who has calculated the acceptable distance and is prepared to close it in 4 seconds if necessary. Linda Carter sat on the bench across the path, a thermos in her lap, smiling at something Noah had just done that I had missed. I sat down beside Emily. We did not say anything for a while, and it was not the silence of people who have nothing to say, but the silence of people who have said the most important things already and are resting in what comes after. The bay was steel gray, and the mountains were behind the clouds, and George was at his cart near the south entrance, Seahawks cap firmly in place, doing what he did every Sunday morning. Some things continue. That is the whole point of them. Emma came running back from the water, breathless and bright-eyed, and skidded to a stop in front of us with the practiced, dramatic timing of a child who has discovered that arrivals are more interesting when they are slightly too fast. She looked at my wrist. Then she looked at Emily's wrist. "Mom's bracelet is different from yours," she announced with the authority of a 6-year-old, delivering a fact she has verified personally. "Hers doesn't have the words." "No," I said. "It doesn't. Not yet." Emma considered this with great seriousness. Then she ran back to the water satisfied, and that was all she needed. I reached into the pocket of my jacket. I had gone to the workshop the morning after the verdict. The small workshop behind the farmhouse in Sequim, where I had not worked in 7 years, where Carol's old tool bench was still there, and the light still came through the north window at the same angle, and the smell of metal and sawdust and wood oil was still exactly what it had always been. I had found the tools where I had left them. I had sat down at the bench and worked for 2 hours the way I used to work on February nights, when what I needed was not sleep, but the particular piece of making something precise out of something raw. I took out what I had made and held it in my palm. A silver bracelet, 1/4 inch wide. A small lavender sprig on the left side, each tiny flower shaped the same way I had shaped Emily's original more than 20 years ago. And on the right side, 2 words in letters small enough that you had to hold it close to read them. Little B. Emily looked at it in my palm and pressed her lips together hard and looked away for a moment, at the bay, at the ferries, at the gray water and the gray sky and the ordinary Sunday machinery of a city that had no idea what was happening on this bench. Then she held out her wrist. I fastened it around her wrist, the way I had fastened the first one, carefully, with the specific attention I gave to things I wanted to last. When I finished, I held her hand for a moment and looked at the bracelet sitting where it was supposed to sit, on the wrist of the person it had been made for after 7 years of traveling a road that neither of us would have chosen, and both of us had survived. "It was always yours," I said. "Little B." She turned her hand over and held mine. We sat like that while Seattle went about its Sunday morning around us joggers and dog walkers and young parents and George with his cart and the ferries crossing back and forth, with the slow indifference of things that have been doing the same job for a very long time. After a while, Emma came running back. She grabbed the bench railing and swung herself around it, and stopped and looked at her mother's wrist, and then at mine, comparing them with the focused scientific attention of a child conducting an important study. "Now they match," she said. "Now they match," I said. She nodded once, the nod of a person whose question has been answered completely, and ran back toward the water, and Sophie ran after her, and Noah stood at the water's edge with his hands in his pockets, watching them, with the patient expression of a child who has decided that some things are worth watching without participating. Michael came and stood behind Emily and put both hands on her shoulders, and Emily leaned back slightly into him, and I looked at the three of them, and at the bay, and at the bracelet on Emily's wrist, and I thought about a little girl following a honeybee across 3 rows of lavender, and deciding with complete and unarguable certainty that it was hers. Some things are yours, even when they are lost. Even when 7 years of snow and silence and a Sunday bench and a grief you carried so long it started to feel like your own name stand between you and them. They are still yours. They find their way back. I built a life around trust and nearly lost everything because of it. This is a family justice story I never wanted to live. But I lived it, and so I will tell it honestly. Do not be like me. Do not hand over what you built without asking harder questions. Do not let grief blind you to the people standing closest to you, smiling the widest. Family justice does not come automatically. It comes to those who are still paying attention when it matters most. I believe God places the right people in the right moment. Not always the people we expect. Sometimes a nurse. Sometimes a bracelet. Sometimes 3 small children in yellow jackets who run ahead because they are not afraid of strangers, because no one has taught them yet to be. In this family justice story, it was all 3 at once. These are my revenge stories. Family will recognize, not built on anger, but on the quiet, patient accumulation of truth. The best revenge stories family can tell are the ones that end not with hatred, but with a bracelet back on the right wrist and lavender growing in the right field. My personal belief, betrayal from those we love, cuts deepest, but love, the stubborn, unreasonable kind, outlasts it every time. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below and tell me which moment hit you hardest. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that ordinary people can carry extraordinary things, subscribe to this channel. More stories are waiting for you. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. One final note. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements crafted to carry a truth worth hearing. If that is not the content you are looking for, I completely understand. Step away, find what fits you. But if you choose to stay, I promise every story will be worth your time.